This is a critical alert. And before we dive into any charts, I need you to help me with something. I need you to reach into your pocket, grab a dollar note, and stare at George Washington's portrait. Study it carefully. Does he appear let down? Does he seem aware his heritage is getting exchanged for worthless junk and poor choices? Because he ought to be. If you continue believing that green slip in your palm is currency, you're heading for a reality check that will sting. I need you to drop the controller. I need you to quit browsing TikTok for kitten clips, because the kittens are doing just fine. The monetary structure is failing. We have now crossed into a stage of the breakdown that academics will document extensively. They won't label it a downturn. They won't label it a slump. They're going to label it global conflict. Greetings, everyone. Your host here, recognized as Asian Guy. It is Tuesday, January 27th, 2026, and the war zone has moved beyond theory. It is now numerical. We are observing a disruption in the worldwide markets that defies logic. In a functioning universe, in a universe where exchanges are productive and linked, the value of a commodity ought to be essentially identical across locations. An iPhone carries the same tag in New York as it carries in London. A barrel of crude carries the same tag in Texas as it carries in Tokyo, adjusting slightly for transport costs. But right now, the principles of finance have been put on hold. We are staring at a fractured existence. I need you to examine the twin figures that characterize this conflict. In New York, on the COMEX, the documentation gambling house controlled by the Atlantic banking system, the value of silver has been crushed downward. They pounded it during the night hours. They unleashed every bearish position they possessed against the structure. The figure on your display is floating near $106.15. If you're an Atlantic capital holder, you are in distress. You are reasoning, oh dear, it tanked. The surge ended. Incorrect. You are viewing the fabricated figure. Now, let's transport ourselves 7,000 miles toward the Orient. Let's examine the Shanghai Futures Exchange. Let's examine the platform where participants genuinely receive delivery of the commodity because they require it to manufacture solar technology and weaponry. The figure in Shanghai stands at $126.95. Calculate alongside me, 126 minus $106. That represents a gap of 2080. That represents a 20% markup. In the universe of price differences, a 1% gap means wealth. A 20% gap means a stellar explosion. It represents a monetary singularity. It represents a suction device the magnitude of a landmass. Do you comprehend what this gap accomplishes to the tangible distribution network? Picture yourself as a silver processor in Switzerland. You possess a 1,000-ounce ingot of silver resting on your workspace. You have dual telephone connections buzzing. On connection 1, it's a financier from New York. He states, I will offer you $106 for that ingot. On connection 2, it's a merchant from Shanghai. He states, I will offer you $126 for that ingot. To whom do you transfer it? You don't require an advanced degree in finance to respond. You transfer it to the individual, offering $20 additional. You disconnect from New York, you blacklist their contact, and you load every single ounce of commodity you possess onto an aircraft to China. This represents the system of the Exodus. This gap ensures that the Atlantic storage facilities will be depleted. It ensures that London, New York, and Toronto will be robbed of their tangible holdings. The commodity migrates to the top purchaser, and presently, the top purchaser is the Chinese Communist Party. They are systematically extracting the prosperity out of the West ounce by ounce, ingot by ingot. And the genius financiers in New York believe they are prevailing because they succeeded in crushing the documentation figure down to $106. They are marking a hollow triumph. Observe, we reduced the figure. Correct, you reduced the figure, but you also confirmed that you will possess 0 stock remaining by next period. You are conducting a clearance at a shop that is preparing to shut down permanently. This is not a marketplace flaw. This is global conflict. This is a calculated financial assault. Beijing understands precisely what it is executing. They are observing the US dollar, which is deteriorating, which we will address momentarily, and they are declaring, we refuse your documentation anymore. We demand your resources. They are utilizing the price difference to reclaim the planet's silver inventory to the Orient, and the West is permitting them to execute it because the West is dependent on reduced figures to conceal price rises. But what is the cause of this occurring presently? What made the gap explode to $20 during the night? Because the barrier restraining the US dollar has ultimately fractured. The price difference explosion is merely the indication. The sickness is the monetary unit itself. We need to address the DXY. We need to address the dollar measurement plummeting beneath 96. Because while you are concerned about the figure of silver declining in dollars, the remainder of the planet is concerned about the dollar declining in all things. The foundation is collapsing from beneath the global currency. Let's proceed to section 2. You cannot comprehend the conflict in the silver marketplace until you comprehend the war zone, and the war zone is the US dollar. For 80 years, The dollar has represented the guiding light of the worldwide financial structure. It was the unchanging element. It was the measurement device by which we calculated all other things. But right now, the measurement device is contracting. The guiding light is extinguishing. We have recently observed a technical collapse that indicates the conclusion of the dollar's dominance, the DXY. What occurred? The dollar measurement, which contrasts our monetary unit to a collection of international competitors, has recently broken beneath the essential resistance threshold of 96. It is presently exchanging at 95 to 8. This is not a temporary drop. This is a foundational catastrophe. Annually measured, the dollar has declined 10.7%. That indicates if you maintained currency in a deposit facility for the previous 12 months, you forfeited 10% of your worldwide acquisition capacity without expending a single cent. You were stolen from while unconscious. But to observe the genuine destruction, you must examine the actual monetary pairings. Examine the Swiss franc. The dollar has declined 14.1% against the franc. Examine the euro. The dollar has declined 12-15%. The planet is abandoning the dollar. Financial authorities in Asia, national investment organizations in the Middle East, and retirement organizations in Europe are all activating the disposal mechanism simultaneously. They are shifting away from the singular global currency and toward a diversified collection of holdings. And what represents the single holding that is impartial? What represents the single holding that possesses no opposing party danger? Silver. Now, I understand what you're preparing to state, but Asian guy, the equity marketplace is at an unprecedented peak. My retirement account appears excellent. I need you to cease examining the figure and begin examining the worth. Correct? The S&P 500 is establishing fresh peaks. But permit me to pose you an inquiry. If the Venezuelan currency crashes, does the Venezuelan equity marketplace ascend or descend? It ascends. It reaches astronomical heights. In 2018, the Caracas equity platform was the top achieving marketplace worldwide. It ascended thousands of percentage points. Did the citizens become prosperous? Negative. They were consuming rodents in the avenues. And the equity marketplace ascended because the monetary unit descended to nothing. That represents precisely what is transpiring in New York presently. The peaks in the S&P 500 represent a mirage of price rises. You're not generating returns. You're merely sprinting to maintain position. You're safeguarding your acquisition capacity against a failing monetary unit, but you're not accumulating prosperity. The exclusive individuals accumulating prosperity are the ones possessing the holding that the dollar is denominated in. This breakdown of the DXY represents the authorization signal for Beijing. China has been anticipating this instant for 10 years. They have observed the U.S. militarize the dollar. They have observed the obligations spiral beyond management. And now that the DXY has penetrated 96, they understand the U.S. is exposed. They understand the Federal Reserve is cornered. If the Fed elevates charges to rescue the dollar, they destroy the financial structure. If they decrease charges to rescue the financial structure, they destroy the dollar. It represents stalemate. And China is capturing the playing field. They have initiated a plan that is so elementary yet so devastating that the Atlantic financiers possess no protection against it. They are not battling with projectiles. They're battling with markups. They're manufacturing their own documentation monetary unit to evacuate our tangible storage facilities. We need to address the Shanghai Plan. We need to clarify how they are militarizing the yuan to extract the American silver inventory. This represents the segment of the narrative where we must acknowledge the adversary's capabilities. We must examine the plan emerging from Beijing and confess that it is masterful. It is merciless. It is aggressive. It represents an action of financial combat, but it is masterful. You observe, most individuals in the West believe that the 20 gap between Shanghai and New York represents a malfunction. They believe it represents a temporary marketplace mistake that will self-correct. They are mistaken. This gap is not a defect. It represents an intentional mechanism. It represents an armament structure. We need to address the Shanghai Plan. Here represents what the Chinese Communist Party has recognized. They are positioned upon a mountain of U.S. Treasury obligations, liabilities that are swiftly forfeiting worth as the dollar crashes beneath 96. They are also positioned upon their own manufacturing mechanism, which can manufacture limitless Chinese yuan. So, what do you execute if you represent Beijing? Do you delay for the West to fail on its liabilities? Negative. You initiate a resource assault. You intentionally permit and potentially even promote the figure of silver in Shanghai to exchange at an enormous markup to the remainder of the planet. You permit it to reach $126. What is the purpose? Because you understand that the Atlantic banking system in their overconfidence will attempt to restrain the figure in New York to 106 to conceal price rises. This establishes the flawless snare. By maintaining the figure elevated in Shanghai, China transforms its complete financial structure into a massive suction apparatus. They are systematically communicating to the planet. We will compensate you beyond what the Americans offer. Deliver us your commodity. And the marketplace complies. We are observing accounts of precious metal merchants in London, processors in Switzerland, and distributors in Australia redirecting their consignments. Vessels that were intended to proceed to New York are reversing direction in the center of the ocean. Aircraft are modifying their travel routes. What motivation would anyone possess to transfer to the COMEX for 106 when they can transfer to the Shanghai Gold Exchange for 126? Economic principles are executing Beijing's objective for them. The unseen force of the marketplace is extracting the United States of its critical reserves and transferring them to its primary geopolitical adversary. And here represents the brilliance of the exchange. China is compensating for this commodity with yuan. They're compensating with documentation monetary unit that they can manufacture at no expense. They are exchanging documentation symbols, artificial monetary unit supported by nothing for silver particles, a critical commodity necessary for solar technology, electric transportation, and precision weaponry. They are exchanging the boundless for the limited. They are providing the West the documentation, and they are acquiring the substance. When the sequence concludes, when the monetary reset ultimately transpires, who is preparing to represent the victor? The nation with the accumulation of documentation currency, or the nation with the accumulation of silver? The response is self-evident. This represents why I characterize it global conflict. It is not a conflict of ammunition presently. It represents a conflict of stock. Beijing has determined that if they can evacuate the COMEX, they can fracture the US dollar's valuation authority permanently. If New York possesses no commodity, New York cannot establish the figure. The valuation authority transfers to the Orient. The London determination becomes the Shanghai determination. And abruptly, the United States is no longer the controller of the monetary cosmos. It represents merely another nation requesting a figure quotation in an external monetary unit. This $20 markup represents the bombardment assault. It is hammering the barriers of the COMEX, and the barriers are fracturing. The storage facility information validates it. The stock is hemorrhaging away. But the authority structure is not preparing to collapse without resistance. The financial manipulators in New York observe what is transpiring. They observe the evacuation, and they have recently initiated a retaliation. It represents a frantic, corrupt, and hazardous maneuver designed to halt the hemorrhaging by coercion. They couldn't locate additional commodity, so they determined to assault the participants instead. We need to address the collateral elevation. We need to address the $51,000 threat they recently positioned to the consciousness of every silver optimist in America. Let's proceed to Section 4. Let's examine the authority retaliating. This represents the segment of the transmission where we reveal the corrupt tactics. Because when you're forfeiting a conflict, when your monetary unit is crashing, and your storage facilities are being attacked by an external superpower, you don't engage honorably. You manipulate. You modify the regulations of the competition in the center of the final period. And that represents precisely what the CME group, the controllers of the COMEX, recently executed. The authority is retaliating, and they are retaliating with the severe impact damage of a collateral elevation. We have recently obtained a breaking notification from the Platform Settlement Organization. Operative instantly, the collateral obligation to maintain a singular position of silver has been elevated to an utterly astounding threshold. They have elevated the preservation collateral to $51,977 per position. I need you to comprehend how absurd that figure is. It permits merchants to utilize amplification. It permits the marketplace to possess flow. But by elevating it to $51,000, the COMEX is systematically triggering a destructive explosion in the documentation marketplace. Here represents how the armament functions. Picture yourself as a speculative capital administrator or gambler. You're maintaining 100 positions of silver because you understand the figure is preparing to skyrocket. Abruptly, you obtain an electronic message from the platform. They inform you that by the conclusion of operations today, you need to transmit them an additional $3 million in currency to maintain your arrangement active. You don't possess $3 million available. You're completely committed. So what do you execute? You possess no alternative. You're compelled to dispose. You must terminate your arrangement, not because you desire to, but because you can't manage the fresh participation charge. This establishes a sequence of fabricated, compelled disposal. It establishes a termination avalanche. Thousands of merchants are ejecting their arrangements simultaneously. And what transpires when all participants dispose simultaneously? The figure collapses. This represents why you observe the documentation figure in New York, crushed downward to $100. It is not because provision and requirement modified. The requirement is superior than previously. It is because the platform manipulated the collateral regulations to compel the figure downward. They are attempting to illustrate a negative indicator on the diagram. They are attempting to frighten you. They desire you to examine the display, observe the figure decline, and reason. Oh, negative, the surge concluded. I should dispose my tangible accumulation. This represents a deception. It represents mental combat designed to fracture the determination of the Atlantic purchaser. They desire to devastate the documentation figure so that the price difference opening shuts. They are anticipating that if they crush New York to $100, ultimately Shanghai will distress and decline also. But here represents the weakness in their scheme. Here represents why the plan is destined to collapse. China does not acquire on collateral. The People's Bank of China does not utilize amplification. The manufacturing purchasers in Shanghai are not gamblers. They are currency purchasers. They compensate 100% initially. So when the COMEX elevates collaterals, it damages the New York gambler. But it executes absolutely nothing to halt the Shanghai suction. In reality, it amplifies it. By crushing the figure to $100, they have recently made American silver even more affordable for the Chinese to acquire. They have systematically positioned the clearance indication up for Beijing. Approach and obtain it. We recently reduced the figure by another $5 for you. It represents a self-destructive plan. They are combusting the furnishings to warm the residents. They are destroying the documentation marketplace's flow merely to endure one additional day. But they understand they can't maintain this permanently. So they have initiated a secondary aspect to this conflict. They are not exclusively assaulting the figure, they are assaulting the storyline. We are observing a synchronized finance defamation operation across digital media. Content creators who haven't mentioned silver in 5 years are abruptly manufacturing content, informing you it represents a negative commitment. They are informing you it represents non-transferable. Meanwhile, the most significant processors worldwide are communicating the precise contrary. We need to address the deception versus the actuality. We need to address what Pamp Swiss recently confessed in a disclosed document. This represents the segment of the conflict that is executed not with currency, but with language. We have addressed the price difference explosion. We have addressed the collateral elevation, but now we need to address the information conflict. Because when the controlling forces cannot repair the provision, when they tangibly cannot extract sufficient commodity from the earth to satisfy the requirement, they must eliminate the requirement. They must make you not desire the commodity. And presently, we are observing a synchronized, well-financed, and genuinely frantic defamation operation against silver across every significant media channel. I desire you to access your device. I desire you to examine the monetary news stream. What do you observe? Abruptly, from nowhere, you possess authorities who haven't referenced precious commodities in 20 years emerging from obscurity to criticize it. You possess publications on Bloomberg and CNBC with titles like Why Silver Represents a Snare for Individual Capital Holders, The Transferability Fabrication, Why You Can't Dispose Your Ingots, Is Silver the Fresh Decorative Stone? Do you believe this represents a chance occurrence? Do you believe that in the center of a monetary breakdown, all these communicators, merely coincidentally determined to compose attack publications on the singular holding that is safeguarding individuals? Negative, this represents a programmed narrative. They are frightened. They understand that if the American population becomes aware, if even 1% of the retirement currency in this nation transfers into tangible silver, the competition concludes, the COMEX fractures in a single afternoon. So they must frighten you. They must deceive you. They must examine the display where the figure has been controlled downward to $106 and communicate, observe, it's crashing. You should dispose presently before it descends to nothing. But here represents the principle for enduring an information conflict. Disregard the commentators. Attend to the technicians. Don't attend to the individual wearing formal attire on television who transfers documentation contracts. Attend to the individual wearing protective equipment who liquefies the gold and silver. Attend to the processors. Because while the media is screaming dispose, the most significant processor worldwide is screaming we are depleted. We have recently obtained a disclosed internal document and public verification from Pamp Swiss. For those who don't recognize, Pamp represents the Rolls-Royce of the precious commodity universe. They represent the supreme benchmark of processing. If commodity is transferring, Pamp recognizes about it. And what did they communicate today? Did they communicate requirement is weak? Did they communicate capital holders are disposing? Negative. They communicated, and I referenced directly, we are observing requirement at thresholds we have genuinely not observed previously. Thresholds we have not observed previously. Contemplate what that signifies. They have been in operation since 1977. They observed the Hunt siblings compression in 1980. They observed the monetary catastrophe of 2008. They observed the compression of 2011. And they are communicating that today, presently in January 2026, the requirement is superior than all of that. They are operating their manufacturing facilities 24 hours a day, 7 days a period. They are compensating their laborers triple additional compensation, and they still cannot maintain pace. The accumulation for commercial delivery is now extending into April. If you request a 1,000-ounce ingot from PAMP today, you are essentially acquiring a commitment. You're acquiring an assurance that perhaps, merely perhaps, they will possess an ingot for you in 3 months. This represents the actuality on the surface. The tangible marketplace is combusting, the storage is depleted, the processors are saturated, and yet the documentation figure on the COMEX is declined. The figure stands $106. It represents a deception. It represents a catastrophic malfunction for the monetary structure. The computational system is informing you one thing, but the actual universe is informing you the precise contrary. This separation represents the definitive indication. When the figure declines, but the scarcity intensifies, it signifies the figure system is fractured. It signifies the figure is no longer an instrument for determination. It represents an instrument for manipulation. The $106 figure designation represents a present. It represents the banking system funding your acquisition. They are essentially compensating you to extract the commodity away from them before the complete structure collapses. But you must be intelligent sufficient to perceive through the defamation operation. You must be intelligent sufficient to recognize that when they inform you you can't dispose your silver, what they genuinely signify is, please, for the sake of everything, don't acquire any additional silver. This delivers us to the ultimate determination. We possess the price difference suction extracting commodity to China. We possess the dollar breakdown destroying the foundation. We possess the collateral elevation frantically attempting to restrict the documentation figure, and we possess the processors verifying that the tangible marketplace is completely depleted. There's exclusively one method this concludes. The elastic connection is extended excessively distant. It is preparing to fracture. And when it fractures, it is not preparing to represent a gentle modification. It is preparing to represent a violent, instantaneous revaluation that eliminates anyone maintaining documentation and elevates anyone maintaining commodity. We need to provide you the determination. We need to inform you precisely what to execute before the COMEX confesses defeat. So here represents the determination. We have established the war zone diagram for global conflict. We have demonstrated you the price difference explosion, the $20.80 gap that is functioning as a massive suction apparatus, extracting every available ounce of commodity from the west to the east. We have demonstrated you the dollar breakdown, the DXY crashing beneath 96, validating that the king dollar is exposed and frightened. We have demonstrated you the collateral desperation, the COMEX elevating the participation charge to $51,000 merely to compel merchants to terminate their arrangements. And we have demonstrated you the processor actuality. PAMP Swiss verifying that despite the documentation figure decline, the tangible manufacturing facilities are operating more intensely than they have in 50 years. The determination is not speculation. It represents a numerical absolute. We are in the conclusion stage of the dollar benchmark. You cannot possess a marketplace where the identical holding exchanges for $106 in New York and $126 in Shanghai permanently. That is not a marketplace. That represents a violation location. That gap signifies the hemorrhaging of the American authority structure. Every day that the gap continues, another 1,000 ingots depart the Kennedy Airport storage facility and transport to Beijing. Every day, the West becomes less prosperous and the East becomes more prosperous. The COMEX has cornered itself into a position from which there exists no departure. They possess 2 selections remaining, and both of them are catastrophic to the existing arrangement. Selection number 1, they confess defeat, they permit the figure to proceed, they halt the restraint, they halt the collateral elevations. And they permit the figure in New York to surge instantaneously to correspond Shanghai. If they execute this, silver surges to $130 tomorrow morning. The bearish positions are eliminated, the banking system forfeits billions, but the marketplace maintains operations. Selection number 2, they maintain battling. They maintain the figure crushed at $106. They maintain pretending the scarcity doesn't exist. If they execute this, the storage facility reaches nothing. The documented stock proceeds to depleted. And then they must announce compelled intervention. They must position themselves and communicate, we don't possess the commodity. The instant they communicate that, the figure of silver doesn't proceed to $130. It proceeds to no proposition. It proceeds to a location where your dollars are no longer recognized as compensation for actual things. We are observing a competition of monetary confrontation between the Federal Reserve and the regulations of reality. Reality is preparing to prevail. The $20 gap must shut. And it is not preparing to shut by Shanghai descending. What motivation would they possess to reduce their figure? They represent the purchasers. They represent the ones with the currency. It is preparing to shut by New York exploding upward. So this represents my ultimate caution to you. Do not get disturbed away by the instability. Do not permit the $51,000 collateral elevation frighten you away from your arrangement. That elevation is not an indication of power. It represents a declaration of fragility. It represents the sound of a financial authority that is depleted of resources. They are attempting to deceive you into exchanging your silver, the exclusive holding that is migrating toward the superior purchaser, for dollars, the holding that is crashing against everything from the Swiss franc to a portion of sustenance. Do not preserve dollars, do not accumulate currency. Currency represents the casualty in this conflict. The opportunity to respond is shutting, not because the figure is ascending, but because the commodity is departing the landmass. China is acquiring it all. If you desire to exist on the prevailing aspect of global conflict, you need to execute what the victors are executing. You need to maintain the commodity. Permit the banking system engage their documentation competitions. Permit them bearish position each other into elimination. You maintain position, you observe the gap, and you delay for the unavoidable morning when the COMEX fractures and the genuine figure of silver is disclosed to the planet. This is Asian guy. The gap stands $20. The storage facility is evacuating. Maintain the position. Like, subscribe and share.